Hi, welcome back to another live stream. We are going to be doing a Dungeon Master and a player guide for today. And much requested is the disguise kit. If it wasn't clear from the thumbnail what the topic was for today, I've kind of compiled everything that I could find officially, and then I've gone and grabbed a whole lot of other stuff from other sources that I thought you would find useful in some way so that you can do whatever you need to do in your game and make it more interesting. Okay, so make sure to get yourself some water, some food, and then comfortable place to settle down and sit down, and we're going to go through this topic and give you pretty much as I possibly can from previous versions of the game as well. So not just Dungeons and Dragons 5e, and that'll help you fill out all the gaps and refine things. Okay, so we're going to get straight into it. Okay, there it is. Got my plugs out and we are ready to go. Hi, welcome to HowtoDandD. My name is Fred Wheeler and today I want to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. Now the topic for today is very much about disguising. This is a video or topic on how to use the disguise kit in Dungeons and Dragons 5e. Now one of the things that I found really useful and interesting in Xanathar's Guide to Everything is they go over a lot of tools and they give you a lot of stuff you didn't have before, but they also tend to give you a whole lot of stuff that's kind of still nebulous, stuff you still have to decide as a dungeon master what you're going to do with. So therefore we're going to go and break this down and give you some guidelines and sort of indicate what they're trying to say in those passages to make it a little bit easier to run your game. So here we go. First off, as I said, this is a Dungeon Master guide and a player guide on how to use the disguise kit in Dungeons and Dragons 5e. Now one of the things that ultimately there is going to be sections here that are useful for players, and then there are sections that are very much specified and lined up for a Dungeon Master. So you'll have to discern which bits apply to you and which parts don't, okay? That's really going to be up to you and your Dungeon Master. Okay, first off, let's start off with the basics that we know. A disguise kit costs 25 gold pieces. Now, where would you get this from? Now, you could potentially get it from just a general store, but if you feel like this is too specialized, a disguise kit wouldn't be something you would just sell at a general store or a trading post, then I'm going to suggest that it's a specialist supplier. Now, where would you get something like this? Probably from a city rather than a town. A thieves guild would probably sell something like this. And also too, a disguise kit isn't necessarily going to be listed or marketed as a disguise kit. It might simply just be a makeup kit for, say, a theatre company. So if there's a shop that sells theatre supplies, then you could probably get yourself what is equivalent to a disguise kit from them, not just a thieves guild. So it's not necessarily something that you're buying that has nefarious reasons for having it. You're not necessarily buying this thing so that you can get up into mischief. It might simply be that you're buying this because you're an actor. What you do with it after that is not up to the shopkeeper, okay, or the supplier that you're buying it from. So there's 3 or 4 options there in terms of where you could get it from. Now the components of the disguise kit are listed in the player's handbook, and they include cosmetics, hair dye, small props, and they don't specify what those small props are, and a few pieces of clothing or cloth. Now I wouldn't say clothing as such. I would imagine they're sort of like, it might be a scarf or a handkerchief or something like that. Now when it says small props, what the heck does that mean? I think what we're talking about is noses and mustache, beards, facial hair that can be glued on. There's probably going to be some glue involved in somewhere along the way to actually attach these things to your face, okay, to make adjustments. There's probably going to be something that allows you to change the way you smell. All those sorts of things are probably there. So it's fairly nebulous. Cosmetics covers a huge array of different things in terms of what you can do, okay? Now, I don't want to go into all of that. I think as a dungeon master, you're going to have to just be relatively flexible and just use common sense. Okay. You don't actually need to have magical spells to disguise yourself. Okay. A disguise kit is actually quite adequate for doing that job. So if you're not a spellcaster, then a disguise kit will certainly do the job. There are some provisions to that, and of course the better the disguise and the better you sort of describe it to your dungeon master, the better it's likely to go off. Anyone can use a disguise kit. I know a few people are going to be freaking out here. Anyone can use a disguise kit. But being proficient with a disguise kit means you can actually use it effectively. So just because you have a disguise kit and you're not proficient doesn't mean you can't use it, but what you're doing with it is probably not going to be very good. Now, whether you apply disadvantage to that or whether the ability to use your disguise kit to actually apply it effectively in your game might be completely different. Maybe the fact that you have a disguise kit is not important. It's more important that you give the disguise kit to somebody else who has the right types of skills to get the job done, because not every single person who's sort of proficient or trained in deception, intimidation, persuasion are necessarily going to have a disguise kit, but you could be carrying one. There are about 4 skills and then 1 ability check that you're probably going to rely on or use the most. And then those are your deception, your intimidation, your persuasion, your performance, and charisma. It might not be spelled out, but seriously, if you look at those sections, we're dealing with charisma. They're all in the charisma section of the player's handbook. So it's a no-brainer. Those are the things you're going to be using in your game. Okay, so I'm taking a lot of this from Xanathar's Guide, Xanathar's Guide to Everything, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to break it up into pieces, okay? So for those of you who know me, I know people are looking for numbers. They're looking for DCs. They're looking for, okay, well, what are we going to actually do with the disguise kit to allow us to actually use it in some effective way in our game? Which means I had to expand. So it's not going to be word for word. It will include some of the text, and then you'll get an example, and then I'm going to break it down for each one of these different skills, and then I'm going to give you sort of some DCs or how you would adjudicate how to deal with that situation for those of you who are unsure, okay? So first off, let's start off with deception. It's the most obvious, it's the no-brainer, it's the one we're all probably going to wind up dealing with the most. In certain circumstances, a disguise can improve your ability to weave convincing lies. Now, what does that mean? It means that, okay, there's a chance of actually deceiving somebody with a disguise kit. That's essentially what it's saying. In the player's handbook, it goes into a little bit more detail, and it says that you get to add your proficiency bonus when you're using your disguise kit to any kind of check, ability check, that changes the way you visually appear or somebody else visually appears, okay? You could apply it to not just yourself, but to somebody else or some other creature if you wanted to. And this is one of the things that's actually really, really interesting, is that when you start applying it to other characters and other creatures, then it opens up a whole new set of possibilities. Okay, so characters can pretend to be, say, a city guard, so you can sneak past the city guards, or pose as city guards, so you can get up to whatever you want to without attracting too much attention. You could disguise yourself as a city official or some sort of official person, nobility. So it would probably be very, 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 very stupid to try to impersonate or deceive somebody into thinking you are a king or a queen, but it's an option. Or any kind of important NPC. Often the desire is, if there's an NPC that you can capture, you stow them away and then you replace them. You're going all Mission Impossible. Do we know what we're talking about, right? You know, the mask that they can construct, and then they put that on and they replace the individual, and their own agent goes in and does their thing. It's the same thing for Dungeons and Dragons. Okay, so important NPCs, probably on the side of the villains or whoever your player characters are working against, or in some cases, if it's the dungeon master using these disguise kits, you can have your NPCs using a disguise to pretend to be somebody they're not actually. That'll really confuse your players. All right, so a difficulty class or DC for these kinds of checks is a contest. Okay, that means you have a deception check, that is going to be made. So that's a 20-sided dice roll, and you compare that with an insight check or wisdom check from whoever is being deceived. So whoever puts on the disguise, they get to make their deception check, and then whoever's trying to determine whether they actually believe this deception, okay, is making an insight or wisdom check. Now the thing with a contest is you must get higher, okay? It's not your normal DC or difficulty class situation. With a contest, it means you must get higher. So the insight to actually determine if someone actually notices that there's a disguise being worn and that they're being deceived, you have to get higher than the check. You can't get equal to, okay? Certainly less than means you fail for sure, okay? So equal to and less than, you fail. You must get higher, otherwise the contest is not going to be successful. Now, I know there are some people who will still want difficulty classes and DCs. So I have selected a few that you can use, but again, I would suggest you stick with using a contest. These examples are pulled directly from Xanathar's guide, so it's nothing new, okay? So a DC 10 would be a deception check to cover, say, injuries like bruises and scratches, or a distinguishing mark. Now, what would that be? Say a tattoo or a mole. If you wanted to get rid of those features, or certainly a tattoo might give you away too much, so sort of being able to cover that up with makeup. Those are all sorts of things you can do, and it's a very simple check, DC 10, as stipulated in Xanathar's guide. Next, a DC 20 would be a deception check to copy a humanoid's appearance. Again, this is just a rough guide when you don't really think that a contest would apply or it's too hard to figure out. So DC 20. So it's hard to do. Okay, 10 is easy and 20 is hard. And probably should be hard. If they know what they're doing and they've got a disguise kit, you would think they'd be reasonably good at doing this. Okay, so that gives you the basics around deception, but we're not actually finished there. We've got the next one, which is intimidation. So intimidation, spelled out again in Xanathar's guide, the right disguise can make you look more fearsome, whether you want to scare someone away by posing as a plague victim, or intimidate a gang of thugs by taking on the appearance of a bully, which I thought was stupid. When I saw that in the book, and I'm like, what? So you're telling me that another bully is going to scare off thugs, which are essentially bullies already? So I put in knight. I thought if you're going to scare off a group of thugs, you're probably going to do that with an armoured knight, rather than, or a group of armoured knights, but one armoured knight might be enough, particularly if they don't wear any armour. Okay, so I've posed that as an option rather than the one that's presented in the book. So some examples of what you could disguise yourself as to intimidate somebody else. Now there are elements of deception in this, so for those of you who are thinking, well, hang on, would that not mean with these particular examples that I'm about to give you that it would be a deception check, not an intimidation check? It's really what you're trying to do with it, okay? If you're trying to scare somebody, we're going to use intimidation. If you're just trying to deceive somebody but not scare them, then we're going to use deception. Does that make sense? Okay, so examples for intimidating somebody. You can disguise yourself as a zombie, probably pretty easy. A ghost would be a bit harder. I imagine that making yourself all white may or may not be convincing enough, because the problem with disguising yourself as a ghost is somebody might try to poke you and see if you're actually there, and it'd be easy to give away what's going on. A king or a queen, again, okay, I know a lot of people will be thinking, well, hang on, a king or a queen, why are we using a king or queen and not in deception? What I'm saying is basically kings and queens are quite intimidating. So I'm putting it under intimidation. And then a soldier or a knight. Those are things. Now it's not an exhaustive list. Okay, I have only presented you with a couple. So a difficulty class or a DC for these checks is usually going to be a contest between intimidation and an insight wisdom check. Because what you're trying to do is there's an element of deception, but you're trying to scare them, so we're going to use a contest, which means you must, with your intimidation check, You must, whatever you roll, whoever's trying to do that insight or wisdom check, they have to get greater than. They can't get equal to or less than. That's going to be a failure. Equal to or less than. Contests work differently to DC checks. Okay? Now, if you decide that a contest is not appropriate, I have 3 different DCs that you could use and an example of what they sort of would relate to. So a scale of some kind for you to work with, which you can change, of course. So a DC 15, you will notice I have not even talked about a DC 10. I decided that a DC 10, which was easy, was a waste of time. So I wouldn't even bother with it. So I've excluded it completely. You'll find this tends to happen in my videos, people. DC 15 is to pry information out of a street thug or a prisoner. So if you've taken somebody prisoner after a battle, or you find somebody in a cell and you want to get information out of them, and you're trying to scare them, so there's probably going to be a little bit of torture involved, or a street thug, then you're definitely looking, I would say, at a DC 15. So DC 15 is a moderate check, a medium check, okay? DC 20 would be to force an official to sign a document that they don't want to sign, or to scare a guard into letting you pass through the city gates, something like that. So those are probably a lot harder to achieve than the other ones. Whereas once you've captured like street thugs or a prisoner, that's going to be a lot easier because, you know, there's a lot working against them. Okay, next, DC 25 is to frighten a creature that is larger than yourself into fleeing, or to stop something like a lynch mob. So if somebody winds up getting dragged by the townsfolk down the street to the tree, they put the rope up and they're going to hang them, and you want to stop that from happening, and you want to scare them, okay, by presenting yourself as an authority figure who is going to do something horrible to them. You're bluffing, hopefully. Bluffing, but a lot of players don't necessarily bluff. Then you can possibly stop a lynch mob, DC 25, which is very hard. And also to frighten a creature that's larger than yourself, because often fear is determined by size. So that's why I've put it there. Now, you don't have to agree with any of these. You can decide that they're not appropriate. I want to do something else. That's fine. Change it up as much as you like. Next, a performance check. So a cunning disguise can enhance an audience's enjoyment of a performance, provided the disguise is properly designed to invoke the desired reaction. Now, when I say disguise, I think that that's the wording in the book. But what we're really doing is, with a performance, again, you might be saying, well, shouldn't this fall up under deception? But what we're trying to do is actually accentuate what is already there. So we're trying to dress up a bit. So if you're a bard or somebody who has skills in a different area, okay, you can improve your chances of being successful in that performance by dressing well. It's like going out to dinner. You dress up to go out to dinner. If you're going to a formal event, or you know, going to a rock concert, or you're going to see some sort of performance, okay, you dress up. Now, here are the different examples I'm going to give you to sort of flesh things out. So what would you dress up for when you're giving a performance? Well, it might be a clown from a circus. It might be the ringmaster, if you are the actual ringmaster in the circus. So how well you dress yourself as the ringmaster is going to be important, right? If you're putting on a magic show as a magician, so if you've got some skills and magic and prestidigitation, and you're going to put on sort of a show and dress up as a magician, it's actually not a deception. You're dressing as a magician, somebody who is involved in magic, and even if you're not using legitimate magic and it's just sleight of hand, it's falling more under performance. Does that make sense? Okay. An actor. So if you're an actor in a theatre production or something like that, or any kind of travelling sideshow that puts on plays and stuff like that. A musician. So this falls back on the bard. So a bard would obviously be trying to dress themselves up. Think about Elton John or Lady Gaga. They dress up significantly when they put on their performances. There's a lot of makeup, there's a lot of costume going on, and it helps elevate their performance. And all performers who are musicians tend to do this. Okay? Then you got your juggler, and then I'm going to say bard, because the bard falls under lots of different things. But you get the idea. Now, what would be some DCs that we could use to give us an idea of what we're doing with performance? Because we're not using a contest this time. I'm actually giving you set DCs that you can scale if you want to, okay? And I'm going to give you 4 because I knew that people would want 4 rather than the standard sort of 3 that I would give out. So first one, DC 10. This is easy, and that is to tell a story in a tavern or around a campfire. So to successfully tell, say, a ghost story or retell an event from your life or any kind of story, it doesn't even have to be a real story. It could be make-believe story. Whatever it is, whatever that story is, we're going to make that a DC 10. So that's a relatively easy thing to do. Next, DC 15. This is to deliver an inspiring speech to an audience or group of individuals or people, or perform an impressive musical display. So you're putting on something that's a bit more elevated than your normal performance that you would see, okay? So an impressive musical display, it's DC 15. Okay, so DC 20, we're going to go with, this is when you perform a memorable, entertaining show that makes you famous. So the show you put on, so DC 20 means that the call has gone out. People are going to be talking about you for days, weeks, months, maybe even years. This is the performance they put on that made them famous around that particular locale, or maybe the entire world as they travel. Who knows? So you're going to get famous from this particular performance. That's how good it was. Okay? So when your dungeon master is describing it, hopefully they'll get the idea of that. They're going to play it up a bit more than normal. Okay, next, a DC 25. What would that look like? That kind of performance is going to attract the attention of an extraplanar being, somebody from a different world. Heck, even the gods are so impressed by what you just did. Now, you will notice that a DC 25 is very hard, and I've said nothing about a DC 30. Why have I not said anything about a DC 30? Because normally with a DC 30, I consider that near impossible and somewhat a waste of your time. I don't generally set DCs of 30. I do, in the past, I have done videos where I've given you a DC 30 for a check, and that's really only because I could see somewhere where it might work. This is one time where I just don't think it needs to work as a DC 30. I think that's kind of unreasonable. Are we making it too hard? Now, for those of you who are wondering, where am I getting all of my DCs and numbers from? I'm not getting it from the Player's Handbook. It's not from the Dungeon Master's Guide. It is not coming out of Xanathar's Guide to everything, apart from the first 2 that I talked about, which I've already way back and when we were talking about deception. A lot of this is actually pulled off the internet, either from older versions of the game or where there's a set number of different tasks that fall under a skill. You will notice from the Player's Handbook that I mentioned a few of these, and they've been ranked. Somebody's put them and ranked them, and I've taken that and transposed it over. And I've also looked at them and thought, well, does that make sense? Is there a progression that makes sense that, okay, this should be easy and this should be harder than the next one? And I've been happy to sort of leave it pretty much the same as I found it. This is actually a lot of the DCs that are on a homemade, custom-built Dungeon Master screen that I made a little while back. Should I say about 7 years ago, actually. All right, so that's performance. Let's move on to persuasion, because there are 4 charisma-based skills, and we're going to probably be using them with our disguise kit quite a lot. So persuasion. Folk tend to trust a person in uniform. Well, yes, they do. If you disguise, or should I say dress, it's actually more important because disguise suggests that you are deceiving somebody, and with persuasion, there's really no deception taking place whatsoever. So really, I want to change out the word disguise from Xanathar's Guide to everything and say, if you dress yourself as an authority figure, your efforts to persuade others are often more effective. Okay, so examples of that would be, and they will be based on the actual player character. Okay, there's no point dressing in a way that doesn't make sense. So for example, if you are a fighter, then you could certainly, dressing yourself as a guard isn't actually a deception, because you're of a military nature. Okay, you're a fighter of some kind. So the difference between what a fighter looks and a guard looks like is probably going to be pretty much the same. The only time it would be a deception is if there's markings or insignia on you that represent a specific set of guards. But any kind of mandatory, standard sort of guard is going to be pretty easy to duplicate, because it could be mercenaries or people for hire or somebody for hire. Okay, now a librarian. Now I've picked a librarian because when I thought about the librarian, now who would be the person, if you want to know something, you want to go to a librarian. So the background, the sage, is your librarian. So if you have the background sage, then it would make sense to sort of dress up that fact. In other words, to dress up that you are sort of, look, don't leave your glasses off. Keep the glasses on. Don't wear the contacts. Make sure that you're dressed in such a way that it's obvious that you have gone to work. So when somebody comes to go and ask information from you, they're actually getting it from a relatively legitimate source. Okay, this is to help persuade people. You're dressing up a bit more. So dressing up as a wizard, as an authority figure. Now, if you're already a wizard or a sorcerer or a warlock, it's not actually a deception to just dress up and look more wizardy than you were before. Does that make sense? If you're a cleric, then dress as a priest. And as long as you don't have insignia on you that designates you to a particular doctrine, then you're fine. If you're wearing your original holy symbol, that's all good. Okay? The difference between a cleric and a priest is very, very, very slim. So that's not a big problem. And so dress up as if you were going to perform, Sunday rites, something like that. You can dress as a soldier. Very easy for a fighter to do. Any kind of paladin can pull this off. A paladin can certainly pull off dressing themselves as if they are a guard of some kind. Now, a monk, we have a class called the monk. So rather than dressing like any sort of commoner or individual, you're going to dress up a little bit more. Okay, maybe you'll make sure that top knot is being cleaned and tied up properly. Maybe you'll make sure that your clothes are clean, and as long as there aren't an insignia, it's not a deception. So you're just dressing up for that occasion rather than wearing your normal travel clothes. Does that make sense in terms of persuasion and using a disguise kit? I know a lot of people might find that really a hard sell, but I'm trying to make it clear to you so that you as players know what you're trying to do. So when you communicate to your dungeon master what you're trying to achieve, they understand and they don't wind up pushing your attempt to use persuasion with your disguise kit into deception, which is maybe not what you wanted in the first place. Does that make sense? Okay, so some DC, some difficulty classes for this. Now, this is one time where you could certainly use a contest, but I'm not going to give you that as a contest. Primarily because I've already kind of talked about that multiple times. And if it's not obvious by now, a lot of this should be a contest between whatever the skill is you're going to be using with your disguise kit and then insight or wisdom. But I'm going to give you some DCs. Here's my scale. So a DC 10, which is easy. This would be to convince a mayor or the town master to allow the party to help in a certain circumstance. Something's gone wrong, nobody knows what to do, and the party puts up their hand and says, look, we can solve this problem, why don't you let us help? So that would be relatively easy to do, right? And then another option would be, say, if you're trying to calm down a distraught person, somebody, a commoner or one of the NPCs is just lost their mind and they're really upset and you're trying to calm them down, we're going to make that a DC 10 to sort of calm them down and have them relax. Again, remember this in conjunction with your disguise kit to dress up. Okay, so DC 15, which is medium. This is to persuade highway thieves or highwaymen or highway people to leave peacefully. So you convince them that it is actually not worth their effort, and there may be some exchange of coin or money to persuade them. You're not trying to deceive them. You might be just saying, look, you know, I'm actually quite a high up wizard, and if you attack me, I'm just going to fireball you, or put you to sleep. So it's not worth your effort to do that, and I suggest you just move on. So that's what you're trying to do with a DC 15. Okay. Yes, I know some people are going to say, yes, there's some elements of intimidation going on there, but there is a fine line. You're going to have to use your brains, people. Okay, so DC 20, which is hard. This is to convince the Chamberlain to let you see the king or queen. Now, when you go into a kingdom and you're trying to see the king or queen for whatever reason, and there's somebody who blocks your way, this is usually the Chamberlain, right? This is the person who makes sure there's a barrier between the monarchy and anybody who might be trying to take them out. To convince them, persuade them that you are here for legitimate reasons and business, and that you have something very important for the king or queen to hear. This is going to be probably done with the Chamberlain, who deals with letting anybody come into the throne or courtroom. Okay, so DC 20. If you're trying to rally the townsfolk, get all the townsfolk together, get them to work together against a common foe or enemy or threat, then we're going to set that as hard as the DC 20. Okay. Next, DC 25, which is very hard. This is the top of the scale that I've got for you, okay? What are you trying to do here? You're trying to convince a sphinx. If anybody knows what a sphinx is, they're very hard to get past. They're very hard to convince. And they usually carry secrets, and they will often give you a riddle that you have to answer. And if you are unsuccessful in answering that riddle, then you've got to find some way to allow them to get you to. So if you want to pass them, you've got to find their thing that will be of interest to them to allow you to do that, because sphinxes are usually pretty nasty. So to convince a sphinx that you are worthy of a secret, this is going to be our DC 25. So to actually get the secret to them without answering the riddle, okay, you're going to have to be pretty convincing. So a DC 25. To assure a dragon that you're worth more alive than just killing and eating, or killing and then taking your stuff, this is going to be your DC 25. Again, all of these checks don't have to be made with a DC. You don't have to use the DCs. You can just ignore them, you can change them, or just use the contest, okay, as I've stated before. Okay, so now let's break it up, because a little bit more guidance is required around some of this stuff. This is just the skill side of things, right? But there is some homework for the Dungeon Master and some things for players to understand so that they find this a little bit easier to work out. So spotting a disguise being used by someone is a DC 15, perception or insight check. Now this is what is actually listed in Xanathar's Guide to Everything. Again, this is a set DC to give you an idea. Again, you can replace it with contests. This is, as I said, only applies to when you don't want to use a skill or ability check, or it would not make sense. Sometimes you will get a situation where somebody might have disguised, say, an object, or created a disguise that you've got to see through, but it's not a contest against them, really. Does that make sense? There'll be very few circumstances that crop up, but there will be a couple where there's not really a contest that's appropriate. So that's just to give you a scale. Xanathar's Guide to Everything gives you that. Right, next, what happens if I don't use or don't think that deception or intimidation or persuasion or performance is appropriate for using the disguise kit? What else do I use? What else could I apply? And I've seen people come up with all sorts of different things, but I've said it before, you're going to use your charisma ability check. It can be substituted for any of the skill checks that I've just talked about when you're using your disguise kit, because it's very much about presenting yourself, and that is charisma. Okay, it's not intelligence, it's not dexterity, it's not about how well you put everything on your face and how well you dress. It's not dexterity, and it's not really intelligence. It's charisma. It's a different type of intelligence. And I think a lot of people fail to understand that when it comes to the mental stats, intelligence, charisma, and wisdom are all part of what's upstairs. And it's a different set of skills that don't always transfer over to everything. Does that make sense? Right. Okay, next. Proficiency in the disguise kit gives you a bonus to any skill or ability check to visually disguise a creature. And so it states in the player's handbook that you add your proficiency modifier to the roll. And I'm going to add this in as an addition. If you don't add the proficiency modifier when using the disguise kit and they're proficient with it, you could also or substitute applying advantage to the roll. So use either the proficiency bonus or use advantage. Now, why would we use advantage? There will be circumstances when people already have a skill and they're already proficient in that skill. And so it would make no sense to give them double proficiency. And you might want to decide to use advantage instead. So if a character already has proficiency in a skill, you can consider stacking proficiency bonuses if you want to. It's not the norm in Dungeons & Dragons to actually stack that. It's usually spelled out by a particular feature. Or use advantage as a substitute rather than using the proficiency bonus if they're already proficient in that particular skill. Does that make sense? For anybody who's wondering how to adjudicate that as a dungeon master, that's my advice to you. So there's another thing I want to discuss, and that is, because we've talked a lot about rolling dice and numbers and stuff like that and contests. Don't assume that only a dice roll is required to use a disguise kit with a skill or ability check like deception, intimidation, persuasion, or performance. Just rolling a dice doesn't do the whole job, okay? Dungeon masters can require specific dialogue from a character or actions, or maybe a bit of detail about how you are going about disguising yourself. So you might have to be kind of specific about how you dress yourself up. That is going to help sell that to your dungeon master. So when you're using the disguise kit, don't rely on just the ability check. Make sure to give them the narrative. That is what your character says to go along with your disguise kit. That's part of the package. And how you are dressing yourself, what type of disguise you are using. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because there's an endless supply. It's like I would give you a list of 1,000 different things you could do. It would be ridiculous. It would take forever. Anyway, next, creating your disguise. How does that work? How long does it take? It's all spelled out in Xanathar's Guide to Everything. As part of a long rest, you can create your disguise. It takes you 1 minute to don such a disguise once you have created it. So you can have it stored in your pack and then put it on later on. You can carry only one such disguise on you at a time without drawing undue attention. So if you try to carry more, it's going to require additional packing, probably a second pack or a larger pack. Pardon me, I need a drink of water. Sorry about that. Still dealing with the weather. Okay, so unless you have a bag of holding or some sort of similar device, so a haversack would be a good option, okay, to keep it hidden, to hide it away. So you can only carry one of these disguises at a time. So if you want to have multiple disguises, try to have that bag of holding or the handy haversack. Each disguise weighs 1 pound. But it would take up a lot of space. So when you start thinking about 1 pound and you think, well, it's only 1 pound, what's the issue? Well, the disguise will be clothing as well. It'll be some sort of costume and clothing involved in this whole thing. So that's bulky. It's not going to weigh a lot. It's just going to take up a lot of space, okay? At other times, okay, it takes you 1 minute to craft a disguise that involves moderate changes to your appearance. So that means you're not really going to put together a full uniform or costume. You're just making slight adjustments to your facial features, or what you're doing with your arms and hands, with the coloration, stuff like that, scars, tattoos, whatever. And 30 minutes for one that requires more extensive changes. So in other words, I think the problem with giving you the idea that, okay, I can create a disguise as a long rest, which is 8 hours, does that mean that as part of the long rest, it takes 8 hours to create? No, probably not, because if you look at how the long rest works, you can spend 2 hours doing something else, whether that be sentry duty or whatever, as long as it's not strenuous, and making the disguise kit is probably not strenuous as such, but 6 of those hours during the long rest is going to be sleeping. But this is the new change to the long rest. For those of you who have got older versions of the Player's Handbook, just ignore all this stuff and just say blah, blah, blah. Okay, Fred, thank you very much. But if you're using the newer version of the long rest, because you have a newer book rather than the older printing, so it's only really, you're only really looking about 2 hours, but between 2 hours to 30 minutes to 10 minutes, depending on how complex the disguise you're creating is, which is going to be determined by your dungeon master. So my suggestion to you is make your disguises in advance, or give yourself plenty of time to do it before you need it. Okay, now additional knowledge and skills in the disguise kit. Okay, there are some things that I've seen people suggest you could do with proficiency in a disguise kit that I don't think translate very well. So additional skills and knowledge, say blending into a crowd, or trying to distract a monster, or understanding creatures and how they sort of they work and operate, or hiding, aren't necessarily covered by proficiency in the disguise kit. I would leave that alone, because I think that what that is stepping on the toes of some of the other skills and the proficiencies that are associated with that. The disguise kit is not a catchment for everything, okay? It doesn't give you every kind of knowledge and deception you need, or it doesn't give you everything you need with regard to sleight of hand, or everything you need with regard to being stealthy. It doesn't really work like that. But it may help your dungeon master to consider these as options. So don't count on these, but you can certainly try them. I wouldn't recommend relying on using the proficiency in the disguise kit to help you with these areas. Pardon me, sorry. Okay, so we need to get on to sage advice. There's only one element to the sage advice section that I found that really relates to the disguise kit for those of you who are looking for that information. So, unless a feature states otherwise, the proficiency bonus for a disguise kit is only added once to a skill or ability check. So if you already have proficiency in any of the skills, such as deception, intimidation, performance, or persuasion, okay, if you already have proficiency from something else that gives it, whether it be your class or your background or your race or something like that, then you don't stack the proficiency twice. This is how Dungeons and Dragons is usually spelled out. And there's nothing with regard to the disguise kit that says that you should be stacking your proficiency bonus twice, so that you stack it on top of a skill that somebody already has. So as a dungeon master, this is where my discussion about advantage. If you still want to give them, they should get some sort of benefit, right? And you don't want to stack that proficiency bonus twice, then use advantage as a substitute, okay? That's the only thing that I found on Sage Advice. Now, in terms of where you will find all this information, the official stuff, official reference books. So the Player's Handbook, you want to look at page 154. This is where the disguise kit is. And then 178 to 179 has the section on charisma. And then Xanathar's Guide to Everything on page 81 has the disguise kit and the expanded information that you were looking for, okay? Anything else is taken from my brain or somewhere else that's not official. So I'm not going to quote it. It's probably not a good idea. Now, this has been my presentation on how to use the disguise kit in Dungeons and Dragons. For those of you who wanted it, you finally got it. I hope this was useful to you, and if it was, fantastic. I actually have hundreds of videos for players and dungeon masters covering every aspect of Dungeons and Dragons and Dungeons and Dragons 5e. Thank you for watching my live stream in this video. And if you want to support the channel so I keep doing video content like this, you can through Patreon, where you get the written scripts for all of my videos and advanced previews of stuff that I have edited for release. Or you can look at the affiliate links down in the description where you can buy stuff online and I get a small commission. And then there is the merchandise shelf underneath all of my videos, or just watch my videos, that's fine too. Make sure to do the usual YouTube things. You know what I'm talking about. Share, like, and subscribe, blah-de-blah-de-blah. Yes, make sure to hit the notification button because I do go live every week, and that will help you be informed that I am actually going to be showing up to present something, and when I publish new edited videos. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s. Okay, we're into questions and answers. So I want to just type in here while YouTube's catching up. Hashtag question. I will answer questions related to the disguise kit or anything. Anything related to Dungeons and Dragons or role-playing games, I will answer those as best I can. So you do not need to just stick to the topic for today. Because I'm not married to that idea at all, for those of you who are wondering. Now, are my eyes any good, or will I need the glasses for today? It's glasses day. Ha ha! We'll put the glasses on. Okay, so, hi Joe, Overboard DM, how's it going? Pale Rider's here. The Mary Kay disguise kit. Really? The Mary Kay disguise kit. Oh, okay. All right. What do you got here, Joe? If you have a beard, it's harder to use a disguise kit. Yep, unless you're going for the bearded lady look. Yeah. Okay, use your common sense. Look, I give you some guidance. I can't give you everything. You've got to figure this out, some of the stuff out for yourself. Oh dear. Oh man, there's more people who have liked this video than who are actually watching the video. Oh, this is an unusual development. I don't usually get something like that. I feel like more people who are subscribed to my channel watch my live streams than watch anything else. This is one of the metrics that I found very interesting, which is why they are now going to stay public. For those of you who are wondering if the video will disappear, no, it will stay public. Okay, hello Scott, how's it going? I love the Val Kilmer remake of the Saint. Yes, great examples of disguise. Yes, so disguising himself as a scientist, an old man, all sorts of different things, and quite convincing, unless you had, actually seen Val Kilmer a lot, you probably would struggle to pick out those changes, right? I mean, sometimes it's obvious. For example, Team America. If anybody remembers that movie, Team America, and the disguise they use in that thing, that's appalling. Anybody's going to see through that one. Tobias, hello Tobias. I think I got your name right. Oh boy, first time catching you live. I got you. You got me live. Well done. Excited to hear your input on this topic. Well, Tobias, I hope that I have given you what you were looking for, and you will let me know if I didn't. Jason, I fear the thumbnail I saw. Dana Curry, and I'm here waiting for that. Oh no. Well, look. Maybe the thumbnail was not the right one to use. I struggled finding something to use as a thumbnail that would be appropriate. It was actually something that I really struggled with. I had a few options and none of them were any good, and in the end I just went with that particular image, and I thought, well, that's the only thing I can think of that will work in this case. Tobias, what do you got here? Does exclusion mean you just let your player do the thing in question, or that you wouldn't include a DC 10 check in your game in favour of a DC 15 check? Exclusion means to leave out, to not use. Does that make sense? I think that's really what we're trying to say here. A lot of the checks that you're going to be making are going to be contests, really. I've given you DCs because I know some people want to have a DC and a scale. And sometimes there'll be situations where it wouldn't make sense to have a contest. They'll be rare, but they could happen. And so that's why I've given you something to work with. And also, too, some people just don't want to deal with that and they just want a DC. So that's fine. You do it however you feel is going to work for your game. Okay? I've excluded DC 10s, and I tend to exclude DC 5 and 10 because DC 5 is very easy and DC 10 is easy. So I just don't see any point in rolling dice for such checks. They just seem like they would be able to just do them. Which means that if you see a DC that I've given or delivered in this video or live stream that's DC 10, you could just say, nah, they just do it. It's perfectly fine. They don't need to roll a check. It's all good. Okay? It's pretty easy to achieve. Unless they do something stupid, they're going to be successful. Does that make sense? Alright. Oh, I didn't do this. I'll just pin this. I should have pinned this. I do apologize for not doing that. There aren't too many people in the chat, so we're probably not going to wind up missing anybody, I suspect. Scott, Jimi Hendrix is the costumed performer that jumped to mind for me. Okay, there you go. Yep. Slipknot. Yep, absolutely. Anything that sort of... Look, performers dress up, and I wanna reiterate that you're dressing up not with the intention of deceiving people, because when people go to a performance, they are expecting you to dress up. You're not necessarily dressing as you normally would, okay? So that's why they fall under performance rather than falling under deception. Does that make sense? Because when you go to a performance, you are expecting them to dress in some way. A magician should be dressing up. You know, your musicians will dress up. So that's the reason. A clown will dress up. It makes no sense to not dress like a clown, does it? People are expecting that. So it's not deception. It's performance. Okay, Jason. Hello, Jason. Tattoo and injury would also cover scars. Yes, I think that would be more than sufficient. I think you could certainly classify a scar as an injury or a tattoo. Of course, depending on how large and the location. But do you think that it would also fit into a low DC 10 check? Well, look, Jason, nothing that I've given you is set in concrete. It is just a scale. It is just something that I've given you. I mean, frankly, it is a bit of a nonsense. But I know people want these things. So you can adjust those. You can say, well, actually, it's easy. It may well be that if you are proficient with a disguise kit, that covering something like a scar up is a DC 10 check and easy for you to achieve. Does that make sense? That you don't really need to try very hard, that you're relatively proficient at some of the basics you can do very, very simply, which is why it's a DC 10, which you might decide, well, actually, there's no point them rolling any dice. Why would I even bother? They just do it. You don't even have to make them make that roll just because I've set down a DC 10. Now, I've said this with some of the other tools, where there are times where it's perfectly fine if they are proficient with that particular tool to just let them be successful, because the check is so simple. Okay? All right, moving on. Hopefully that answered your question, Jason. Jelly ooze. I think I got it right. Valuable knowledge. Thanks. As you're welcome. There were a lot of people who requested this, so this is why I've done this video. Obviously not necessarily a lot of people showed up for it, but I'm sure that the replay will do well. Okay, next. Slick Nasty. Do you use the spell Disguise Self in a similar... look, the spell Disguise Self is very, very different. Okay? You can apply it that way, but look, let's look at the book, the Player's Handbook, because this video is not about the Disguise Self spell, which is a different animal in itself. We're talking about the Disguise Kit. You're magically disguising yourself. So in other words, I would imagine that the Disguise Self spell is probably going to be much better than any kind of disguise you can make with a Disguise Kit, because it's magical. There are things you can do that would be significantly easier, and it's much faster. You know, that's one of the major things to consider. The key differences. So yes, let's have a look here. Disguise Self. So speed is going to be one of them. I need to get these glasses off because I'm not going to be able to read anything while I'm doing that. Pardon me. Here we go. We're on page 233. And let's have a look and see what it says here, if I can actually read it in this light. So it's a duration of 1 hour. It takes an action, so it's only 6 seconds. So much faster than using your Disguise Kit. You make yourself, including your clothing, armor, weapons, and other belongings on your person, look different until the spell ends or until you use your action to dismiss it. Ooh, man. You can see 1 foot. You seem 1 foot shorter or taller, and can appear thinner, fatter, or in between. So in other words, there's some pretty significant changes you can make, which it would be it would be harder, be very, very hard to make yourself look taller with a Disguise Kit without stilts to get taller. And to get smaller, that's probably not going to be possible. So there's some significant changes there. As for making yourself look thinner, probably can't do that with a Disguise Kit, but you could probably pad yourself out to make yourself look fatter. Does that make sense? So there's a difference between your Disguise Kit. You can't change your body type, so you must adopt a form that has the same basic arrangement of limbs. Okay, so the Disguise Kit wouldn't be able to do anything particularly significant, so that sort of falls into the same realm. Otherwise, the extent of the illusion is up to you. The changes wrought by the spell fail to hold up to physical inspection. So this is one of the things that would be the difference. The spell, once you interact or they touch you and you've got the spell in place, they're going to be able to discern that it's a fake. Okay? Whereas with a Disguise Kit where you're actually using physical props and clothing, that's not going to be given away. Touching isn't going to give you away. Okay, which is probably one of the significant changes or differences between using your Disguise Kit and using the Disguise Self spell. For example, if you use this spell to add a hat to your outfit, in other words, with Disguise Kit, you would actually you'd have a hat, you'd have a piece of clothing, right? Objects pass through the hat, and anyone who touches it would feel nothing or would feel your head and hair. If you use the spell to appear thinner than you are, the hands of someone who reaches out to touch you would bump into you while it was seemingly still in midair. So in other words, illusion probably not as good as using the Disguise Kit in some respects. There are pros and cons to both. Okay. To discern that you are disguised, a creature can use its action to inspect your appearance and must succeed on an intelligence investigation check against your spell save DC. So in this case, they're using investigation. Now, that also suggests, and you could, like a lot of things, you could decide that a wisdom check or a insight check is a contest with anything like deception, persuasion, or intimidation, that you're going to use investigation if you really want. But I think investigation is about close inspection. okay? Whereas I suggested insight and persuasion as skills to use as a contest for finding out if there's a disguise, a deception of some kind, or an upgrade from what you normally see. I've selected those because I thought they made more sense. A lot of this is not written in concrete. You've just got to decide what you think is going to be appropriate. And there's a couple of different options. Okay. Slick Nasty, did that give you what you wanted? Okay, so TD Gaming Deluxe, please make more Curse of Strahd videos. I make more Curse of Strahd videos all the time. There's a live stream almost every month. Now, I had a little bit of a hiatus while I was trying to get through a lot of book reviews, but you're going to see a Curse of Strahd video or something similar in nature every month as a live stream. And then eventually there'll be an edited video that'll come out that's in conjunction with that. So you can be sure you're going to get that. Now, what is likely to happen next week? I am still tossing up whether I talk about the dragon and the Dragon of Icespire Peak, because I am tempted to talk about that next week as a Dungeon Master Guide. But I know that Halloween is coming up, and I'm very tempted to do a video on monsters that you could use for Halloween. And of course, it will not be your standard monsters, because that's not what I do here. I will probably go outside the norm that you're used to and try and present something that's sort of a little bit different. But yes, you can be assured that the Curse of Strahd videos will continue, the live streams will continue, and they will be about once a month. I don't think I can do it any more than that. It's too hard to develop them. Does that make sense? Halloween monsters. Okay. I think somebody likes the idea of Halloween monsters. Good. If I have a lot of people say Halloween monsters, so that's one person who said yes to Halloween monsters. If I had like another person who said yes to Halloween monsters, I'm probably going to do Halloween monsters. If somebody says, no, talk about the dragon from Dragon of Icespire Peak, I'm probably going to do the dragon from Dragon of Icespire Peak. This gives you time, people, in the chat to vote. 3 votes and it's sold. Second for Halloween monsters. Justin, you got in there quick. Okay, now, working my way through here while Slick Nasty. Also, any good memory you have of a awesome disguise kit moment in one of your games? No, not off the top of my head, but that's probably because I'm full of gunge in my sinuses and in my brain, and I just had my second vaccination last week, and I am paying for it. Hence, I am not sounding that great, and yeah. But, vaccination is better than death. So that is my view on this case. And it is one of those things, if you want to work, the time is coming where in my country, they're going to, and like everywhere else, they're going to say, look, if you haven't had your 2 vaccinations, you're not coming to work. Go get another job. And then you'll find the same problem wherever you go. So I'm feeling a little bit, and then there's the change of seasons. We're going into spring, and I tend to get a little bit weird around that time as well. Rivers RPG. Hail! Now, Rivers RPG channel has a YouTube channel, surprisingly, and he does lots of different things, and I suggest going and checking him out. So I've only got 2 votes for Halloween monsters and nothing for the dragon from Dragon of Icespire Peak. Wow. What else have we got here? Jason. Thanks for doing the disguise kit. You're welcome. Good information. Now, in about 2 weeks, I'm probably going to do something else. Just give me a second. That was quick, wasn't it? I disappeared and then I'm back. I have got to do another topic for, I think, players. And I have been tossing up what to do next. So you guys are going to help me with that. This is part and parcel of being part of a live stream, is voting. Always very, very helpful, right? Unless, of course, I don't get anybody saying anything, and then I'm like, oh, okay, all right, okay, I just do whatever I like. And you'll get it eventually. So I could do another tool. I could cover another tool from Xanathar's Guide to Everything and flesh it out for you in about 2 weeks. Or I could cover another spell. What spell would that be? It might be time for prestidigitation in about 2 weeks. So do I do another tool? And what would that tool be in 2 weeks as a live stream? Or do I cover clever uses of prestidigitation? Although I feel like that video should be annoying and ridiculous uses of prestidigitation. The forgery kit. So we have a vote for one of the tools, the forgery kit. Aha. 2 votes to the forgery kit and we get the forgery kit. Otherwise, we might be doing some other tool or prestidigitation. Yes, it did. Can we hear next week's topic? Well, I'm covering that now. Possibly vote again. Yes, absolutely. Great. Now this is, so look, I know there's not that many of you in here. So I'm going to just give you a quick rundown while you are deciding what you want to do. Oh, two for the forgery kit. I need one more, and that seals the deal. For 2 weeks from now, I do the forgery kit. So Justin and Slick Nasty have voted for the forgery kit. Do I have a third? And what am I doing next week for the Dungeon Master? Am I going to be doing Halloween monsters, or are we going to be doing the Dragon of Ice by a Peak? Otherwise, I will just do whatever I feel like doing. This is how I work here. To give you an idea of what is going on, I am part of the Dungeon Master Roundtable. In truth, I'm probably instrumental in building the whole thing, okay? Along with, I would say, Wally has helped a lot. Wally DM has helped a lot, and AJ Pickett has been very, very helpful. And there's a few other people who've really sort of gotten involved. But instrumental, it's been the thing that I've wanted to have happen like ever. And you might notice my channel trailer talked about talking to other people about Dungeons and Dragons, and that it's taken me 5 years to actually make that happen. It's taken me that long to finally make it happen. So I'm meeting up with AJ Pickett, for those of you. Here we go. A third for Halloween monsters. Come on, guys. Laugh out loud. Spooky season. Right. So Slick Nasty has done... No, we don't have a third. That's only counts as 2 votes. Come on. You got to give me a third one from a different person. Can't be the same person. So I'm meeting up with AJ Pickett today in a couple of hours. 2 hours, I believe, or less than 2 hours. And HowtoDandD, which is Josiah. And I'm also meeting up with a new guy, Byron, or Ryan, as I tend to call him, whether that's the right name or the wrong name. He seems to be pretty flexible. And that's Dungeon Masterpiece. Now, for those of you who don't know much about Dungeon Masterpiece, it's a tiny channel. It's just come out, and he's got some very interesting content coming up. Scott, you're jumping on the bandwagon. Which bandwagon are you jumping on? Tell me. You have to tell me, Scott. Which bandwagon are you jumping onto? You haven't told me. Are you jumping on the forgery kit bandwagon, or are you jumping onto the Halloween monster bandwagon, or are you jumping onto both of those? Because you can vote for both of them at this present time, couldn't you? Which bandwagon are we on? Halloween monsters is a done deal. It is Halloween monsters next week. It's just about whether the forgery kit is going to be in 2 weeks now. So we have a bunch of questions we have to answer. And Ryan, after I told him he had to come up with some pretty impressive questions, has asked us 4 questions. And I had to come up with some stuff. So one, he asked about one book or supplement that I think there needs to be in Dungeons and Dragons 5e that hasn't been produced, that I think there should be. So I have something in mind. I don't know what the other guys are going to say. Yeah. And then he had another question about where do I draw inspiration that is not RPG or role-play game or Dungeon Master related. So where do I draw it from? So I've already got my answer prepared for that. For those of you, I'm sure a lot of you will have the same answer. And then he then asked me a question about rules. And what I sort of learned from playing a different RPG other than Dungeons and Dragons. So this is the next question. I've got something for that because I have played more than just Dungeons and Dragons. I've played a few other games as well, for those of you who are unaware. And then the last question was, out of the official settings that Wizards of the Coast has put out or has been released for Dungeons and Dragons by third parties or whatever, which one is the one that I like the most? Or actually, that's not true. The question was more around which one do I think that Dungeon Masters and players would benefit from and why they would benefit from them. So those are questions that are going to show up on his channel at some point pretty shortly in the next couple of weeks. And you will get AJ Pickett's opinion, you'll get Josiah from DungeonDad, and you'll get my opinion, and of course you'll get Ryan's opinion as well on those questions. For those of you who are kind of wanting sort of like a heads up as to what be happening in the Dungeons and Dragons, or should I say Dungeon Master Roundtable. Now, still keep your eye out for Mr. X, AJ Pickett, and Jordan, PH is Silent, and DungeonDad collaborating and doing more stuff. It probably won't happen as often as I would have liked, but AJ Pickett is looking after that, and there's only so much he can achieve because that sort of content doesn't do well on their channel. They tend to make what's called evergreen content. Lore videos are more evergreen. They transcend editions of Dungeons and Dragons, so they are much more watchable. What I will say is, who's coming up? Does anybody know Steely Sam? Does anybody know the YouTuber Steely Sam? Are you aware of Steely Sam? Because Steely Sam has joined the Dungeon Master Roundtable, and you're going to see Steely Sam in a Dungeon Master discussion. There's going to be. You missed a whole lot, Solaris, a whole bunch. So for those of you who are hanging out and hoping that you might see somebody like Steely Sam in a Dungeon Master Roundtable, yes, it's going to happen. Absolutely. I've got him booked for 4 meetings. And my hope is that once he's finished those 4 meetings, that he'll keep coming back. Steely Dan, I don't think he is. No, Steely Sam is a new YouTuber. He's got about 50,000 subscribers, more than I do. And he does shorts, a lot of shorts videos. He's pretty popular, maybe not with my audience as such, but he's the kind of person who's going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons lore. As you may have discovered, I have bringing more and more people on who are talking about Dungeons and Dragons monster lore and just Dungeons and Dragons lore. You're probably going to get a lot more of that. And you're probably going to start seeing cropping up in the future shorts videos demonstrating, explaining and demonstrating rules for Dungeons and Dragons 5e. For anybody who's familiar or aware of my series of videos I did on Dungeons and Dragons 5e and how to play Dungeons and Dragons 5e, I did a lot of short videos, like 2, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, sometimes 6 minutes, depending on how long or complicated it was. And I used dice and miniatures and maps and a whiteboard and stuff like that. I'm going to use the short form video that's less than 60 seconds to make those sorts of things. So Scott, yes, you like the lore videos. You can expect far more of them because we're bringing more and more people who are involved in the lore of videos on board. So they're definitely going to show up on the channel. You're going to see a lot more discussion around monsters. And for those of you who are wondering about player stuff, those shorts videos are certainly targeted at players. Doesn't matter what nationality. They should be simple enough that the YouTube machine or translator should be able to figure out how to translate it correctly. But I'm also looking and in the process of developing another part of the Dungeon Master Roundtable, which won't really be called the Dungeon Master Roundtable. It will be part of parcel of those people, but there's a collection of people who make videos on YouTube that are targeted more at players, who make character builds. I'm not really fond of those myself, even though I have a video that's very popular in that area. Yes, you will see another character build on my video at some point, but it's more cautionary than anything. And talking about different abilities and spells and stuff like that. I mean, I do that sort of stuff already. But I'm going to do a line of videos that talk about, and this is in conjunction with other people who focus on player content. For those of you who remember my series on how to use clever uses of mundane adventuring gear, there are a few items that I never did. So I'm going to pull on the big guns and get some help from some other people to help me make those videos and get them. I figure I'll pull out those people who are much more focused on player stuff than Dungeon Master stuff. And I'm also going to work on with them a series of videos that talk about how to defeat and kill monsters. So how to defeat or kill a dragon or a beholder, or, you know, there are some basic guidelines and strategies that you use no matter what type of game you're playing, whether it be Dungeons and Dragons 5e or it's the basic set. It's the original game that came out. They follow the same sort of pattern usually. And so you're going to see that kind of content in the future. Certainly it should pop up sometime in the new year for sure. I've got a backlog of videos for probably half a year. There's so much content now, and I'm trying to release as much as I can. Okay, I think we've covered everything. I'm about to lose my voice. I can't afford to do that. Thank you to everybody who showed up. You guys have been fantastic. Thank you very much. I now have the video content for what I need to do next week, and I have plenty of time to work on it, which is great. So thank you for watching the live stream. Wherever you are in the world, whether it be the morning, the afternoon, or the night, or the wee early morning, please look after yourself, your family, and your friends. Be nice to your neighbours. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s.